video sweeping social media. Is that really Elvis Presley? The tall man with white hair, a white beard, and dark sunglasses? Yes, the truth is getting out. Elvis is alive.
In 2025, scientists tested Elvis Presley's DNA again. What they found shocked everyone. The new results did not match the official story of his death. Instead, the evidence suggested something unbelievable, that Elvis could still be alive. How could this be possible after so many years? Join us as we uncover the mystery behind this discovery. The 2025 DNA testing project. The project began quietly in January 2025, when the Morrison Foundation, a private research organization based in Nashville, Tennessee, announced that they had obtained what they believed were authentic biological samples connected to Elvis Presley. The foundation had been established specifically to investigate unsolved historical mysteries using modern scientific methods. Their previous work had included DNA analysis of samples connected to other historical figures whose deaths or identities had been disputed over the years. The Elvis Presley project was, by far, their most ambitious undertaking, and the one that attracted the most attention from both the scientific community and the general public. The foundation's director, Dr. Patricia Morrison, explained at a press conference that the samples they had obtained included hair follicles, blood residue on clothing items, and tissue samples that had been collected and preserved by various individuals in the years following Elvis's death. Some of these samples had been obtained through proper channels from estate auctions and from collectors who had acquired items with biological material still attached. Others had come from private individuals who claimed they had preserved samples at the time of Elvis's death for personal reasons they had never fully explained. Dr. Morrison was careful to acknowledge that the provenance of some samples was difficult to verify completely. She said that the foundation had done extensive work to document the history of each sample and to establish as convincingly as possible that the materials were genuinely connected to Elvis, rather than being fabrications created by people who wanted to sell valuable memorabilia. The foundation had consulted with authentication experts, with historians who specialized in Elvis's life, and with forensic professionals who could assess whether the samples were consistent with the types of biological material that would be expected from the claimed sources. The scientific team assembled for this project included forensic geneticists from several American universities, a DNA specialist who had worked on high-profile criminal cases, and an expert in the preservation and analysis of degraded biological samples. The team was deliberately chosen to include people who had no strong opinions about Elvis conspiracy theories, and who approached the project as a straightforward scientific investigation, rather than as an attempt to prove or disprove any particular narrative about Elvis's fate. The DNA testing methods, available in 2025, were dramatically more sophisticated than anything that had existed in 1977 when Elvis passed away, or even in the decades that followed. Modern techniques could extract and analyze DNA from extremely small and degraded samples. They could identify individual genetic markers with precision that was simply not possible with earlier technology. They could also detect subtle differences between samples that might indicate they came from different individuals, even when those individuals were closely related. These capabilities made it theoretically possible to address questions about Elvis's death that had been impossible to resolve with older scientific methods. Dr. Morrison explained that the primary goal of the project was to create a comprehensive genetic profile of Elvis Presley based on the available samples. This profile would then be compared against DNA from known relatives of Elvis, including members of the extended Presley family who had agreed to provide samples for comparison purposes. If the samples genuinely came from Elvis, they should show consistent genetic markers that match the family profile in predictable ways. If the samples showed inconsistencies or anomalies, that would raise questions that deserved further investigation. The foundation also obtained a sample that they described as particularly significant. They had acquired a piece of fabric from Graceland that had been stored in a sealed container since being collected by an employee in the days immediately following Elvis's death. The fabric contained biological material that appeared to be blood, and the foundation believed that testing this sample would provide information about whether the biological material was consistent with what would be expected from someone who had recently passed away under the circumstances described in the official account of Elvis's death. The testing process took several months and involved multiple rounds of analysis to verify results and to rule out contamination or other potential sources of error. The team worked carefully and methodically, understanding that their findings would be intensely scrutinized and that any mistakes would undermine the credibility of their conclusions. Dr. Morrison required the team to conduct all key tests multiple times and to have results reviewed by independent experts who had not been involved in the original analysis. When the initial results began coming in, the mood in the laboratory changed noticeably. Scientists who had approached the project with professional detachment started showing signs of genuine excitement and concern as the data revealed patterns that were unexpected and difficult to explain. Dr. Morrison called a meeting of the entire team to review the results together before any information was shared outside the group. She wanted to make sure that everyone on the team had the chance to look critically at the data and to raise any concerns about methodology or interpretation before any conclusions were announced. The meeting lasted for several hours as scientists went through the data point by point. There were debates and disagreements about how to interpret certain results. Some team members argued for cautious, conservative interpretations that acknowledged the possibility of contamination or sample degradation as explanations for the anomalies. Others felt that the consistency and pattern of the unexpected results made mundane explanations difficult to sustain. By the end of the meeting, the team had agreed that they were looking at genuine anomalies that deserved serious attention and further investigation. However, what they discovered next left them in shock. What the DNA results actually showed. The first major finding from the DNA analysis involved a comparison between samples that had been officially documented as coming from Elvis's body and samples from verified living relatives of Elvis. The relatives who had agreed to participate in the study included several cousins and more distant family members who shared genetic heritage with Elvis through the Presley family line. Any genuine sample from Elvis should show DNA markers that were consistent with this family genetic profile. When the scientists compared the official samples against the family reference DNA, they found a small but consistent set of discrepancies that could not be explained by normal genetic variation within families. The differences were not dramatic enough to indicate that the samples came from a completely unrelated individual, but they were significant enough that the statistical probability of them occurring randomly was extremely low. The team ran this comparison test multiple times using different statistical methods and consistently found the same discrepancies, which ruled out the possibility that the results were due to calculation errors. Dr. James Whitfield, the forensic geneticist who led the comparison analysis, explained the findings to his colleagues using careful scientific language. He said that if he received these results in a criminal case context, he would conclude that there was a meaningful question about whether all the samples had come from the same individual. The discrepancy pattern was consistent with what might be expected if some samples had been switched or substituted at some point in the chain of custody. The results did not prove that such a switch had occurred, but they were difficult to explain otherwise. The analysis of the Graceland fabric sample produced even more startling results. This sample contained blood and tissue material that the Foundation had obtained through careful provenance documentation, suggesting it had been collected at Graceland in the days after Elvis's official death. When the scientists analyzed the biological activity markers in this sample, they found something that caused considerable debate within the team. Living cells and recently dead cells behave differently at the molecular level. When a person dies, various biological processes continue for a period of time before finally stopping. The pattern and timing of these changes can provide information about when death actually occurred relative to when a sample was taken. The analysis of the Graceland fabric sample showed cellular activity patterns that were inconsistent with the official account that Elvis had been dead for several hours before being discovered. Dr. Sarah Chen, the team's specialist in degraded biological samples, spent several weeks analyzing the Graceland fabric results before presenting her conclusions to the group. She said that the cellular markers in the sample were more consistent with material collected from a living person or from someone who had very recently passed away than with material from someone who had been dead for the extended period, indicated by the official timeline. She acknowledged that sample degradation over almost 50 years complicated interpretation, but she felt the pattern was clear enough to be scientifically significant. The team also found DNA from the Graceland fabric sample that showed a genetic profile consistent with Elvis's family background. But the specific genetic markers differed in the same ways from the officially documented samples as the other comparative tests had shown. This consistency across multiple different analyses and sample types made the team increasingly confident that they were not dealing with random variation or simple contamination. The pattern suggested something systematic was going on. Another significant finding came from analysis of samples taken from items that had been authenticated as belonging to Elvis by the estate and by respected Elvis memorabilia experts. These items included hair follicles attached to personal grooming items and microscopic tissue material on clothing that had been carefully preserved. The DNA from these items showed a consistent genetic profile that matched the family reference DNA well, significantly better than the profile from the officially documented body samples. The team concluded that there appeared to be two distinct genetic profiles in the collection of Elvis-associated samples. One profile, found in items authenticated as belonging to Elvis during his life, matched the family reference DNA closely. Another profile, found in samples officially documented as coming from Elvis's body after death, showed the consistent discrepancies that had been identified throughout the analysis. The simplest explanation for this pattern was that the two groups of samples did not come from the same person. Dr. Morrison presented these findings to the full team and asked for their honest assessment of what the data meant. The discussion was serious and thoughtful, with scientists debating interpretations and trying to identify any conventional explanation that might account for the results without requiring the conclusion that Elvis's death had been faked. After exhaustive discussion, the team could not identify any ordinary explanation that adequately accounted for all the anomalies they had found. The possibility that Elvis had somehow survived officially while still providing substitute biological material for identification purposes could not be ruled out based on the scientific evidence. But there was another piece of evidence that the team missed. How did this evidence change their discovery? The evidence that supported the DNA findings. When preliminary information about the DNA results began circulating among researchers and investigators who had spent years studying the circumstances of Elvis's death, it prompted a wave of new information from people who had been holding back information for decades. The DNA findings gave these individuals the confidence to come forward with what they knew, understanding that their accounts now had scientific support that made them harder to dismiss as mere conspiracy theorizing. A retired forensic pathologist named Dr. Raymond Stokes contacted the Morrison Foundation after reading a summary of their preliminary findings. Dr. Stokes had spent his career analyzing autopsy photographs and medical records in various legal and investigative contexts. He had examined the available documentation from Elvis's death several years earlier as part of his own private research into the case. Dr. Stokes said that he had identified several irregularities in the official records that he had never been able to fully explain, and that the DNA findings now made those irregularities seem much more significant. Dr. Stokes pointed out specific issues with photographs from Elvis's autopsy that he said were inconsistent with what he would expect to see based on the official account of how Elvis had passed away and how long he had been dead before being found. The body in the photographs showed certain physical characteristics that seemed more consistent with someone who had passed away more recently than the official timeline indicated. Dr. Stokes was careful to say that he was not making definitive claims, but that the photographic evidence was problematic and deserved fresh examination by qualified forensic experts. Medical records from Baptist Memorial Hospital, where Elvis had been taken after being found unresponsive, contained entries that several medical professionals reviewing them found puzzling. The records showed certain vital sign readings and medical observations that seemed inconsistent with someone who had been dead for the amount of time the official account specified. Medical professionals who reviewed these records noted that the documentation pattern was unusual and that certain entries appeared to have been made out of sequence or to have been added after the fact in ways that disrupted the normal flow of emergency medical documentation. A woman who had worked as a housekeeper at Graceland during the 1970s came forward after years of silence to describe events she had witnessed in the days surrounding Elvis's death. She said that in the 48 hours before Elvis was officially found dead, there had been unusual activity at Graceland, including the arrival of people she did not recognize, the removal of boxes and personal items late at night, and conversations between members of Elvis's inner circle that stopped abruptly whenever she entered a room. She had been told by a senior staff member that she should not talk about what she had seen and that her continued employment depended on her discretion. The housekeeper also described something she had witnessed the morning that Elvis was officially found dead that had always troubled her. She said that the emotional reactions of the people directly involved seemed muted and controlled in a way that was different from genuine shock and grief. She had experienced genuine sudden death in her own family and knew how people reacted to unexpected loss. The behavior of the people at Graceland that morning did not match what she would have expected from people who had just discovered the sudden death of someone they loved and depended on. A former worker from the funeral home that handled the body of Elvis Presley shared strange details about the viewing and burial. He said very few people were allowed to see the body closely. Access was tightly controlled. He overheard staff talking in ways that made him feel the viewing was carefully planned to stop people from looking too closely. He also said the casket setup and the lighting in the room were unusual. In his opinion, the lighting made it harder to clearly see the face of the deceased. At the same time, investigators studied the financial records of Elvis's estate. They found money activity that did not look normal for a sudden and unexpected death. Large amounts of money were moved through different accounts in the months before and after his death. The pattern looked planned, not rushed. Some transfers seemed designed to make money available quietly over a long period of time, not just to settle an estate in the usual way. Investigators also reviewed reports of Elvis sightings. When they placed the reports on a map, they noticed a pattern. The sightings were not random. Many were in the southern and southwestern parts of the United States. Most happened in small towns and rural areas, not big cities. One former musician who had worked with Elvis in the early 1960s said he saw a man he believed was Elvis at a church in rural Mississippi in the mid-1980s. He kept quiet for many years to avoid ridicule. If Elvis was truly alive, how was he able to deceive the whole world? Or did he receive help from some trusted people close to him? The people who knew the truth. The DNA findings led investigators to look much more carefully at the small circle of people who would have been essential to executing any plan to fake Elvis's death. Such a plan would have required the knowledge and cooperation of at least several individuals who were close to Elvis and who had the ability to control information and logistics around the staged death. Investigators identified the most likely candidates and began reviewing everything that was known about their behavior before and after August 1977. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, was the person who would have been most essential to any survival plan. Vernon was deeply devoted to his son and was involved in every aspect of Elvis's life and finances. If Elvis was going to fake his death, he would need his father's knowledge and help because Vernon controlled important aspects of the practical arrangements that would be required. Investigators noted that Vernon had made several unusual financial and legal decisions in the weeks before Elvis's official death that were difficult to explain if he was simply a father unaware of what was about to happen. Vernon had updated certain legal documents and made changes to financial arrangements in ways that were not typical of someone expecting ordinary death to come at some unspecified future point. But that made more sense as preparations for a planned event with a specific timeline. Vernon had also sold certain properties and consolidated assets in ways that simplified Elvis's financial footprint, which would have been useful if Elvis needed to access money discreetly over many years. These actions had been noted by researchers before, but had been explained as coincidences or routine estate planning. Vernon's behavior at Elvis's funeral had struck some observers as less grief-stricken than might be expected from a father who had just lost his only son. Vernon was known to be deeply emotional and had been devastated by the deaths of other family members. But at Elvis's funeral, witnesses described him as seeming controlled and purposeful rather than shattered by grief. Some people who had known Vernon well said that his behavior reminded them more of someone executing a planned event than of someone experiencing sudden, devastating loss. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager for over 2 decades, was another person whose behavior after Elvis's death raised questions. Colonel Parker had built his entire career and financial existence around managing Elvis. One would expect him to be devastated by his client's sudden death and at a loss for what to do with his life. Instead, Parker moved quickly and efficiently to manage the commercial aspects of Elvis's legacy, signing deals and making arrangements that seemed to require preparation that went beyond what would normally be possible in the aftermath of an unexpected death. Parker had also made statements in the years after Elvis's death that seemed cryptic or evasive when asked directly about the circumstances of Elvis's passing. He would deflect detailed questions with vague responses or with jokes that changed the subject. People who had worked with Parker said that this evasiveness was uncharacteristic of a man who was normally direct and decisive in business matters. They noted that Parker seemed to react differently when asked about Elvis's death compared to other topics, suggesting that this particular subject required special care in how he responded. Dr. Nichopoulos, who had been present at Graceland on the day of Elvis's death and who had accompanied his patient to the hospital, occupied a unique position as someone who would have had essential medical knowledge to make any survival plan work. If Elvis was going to fake his death convincingly, he would need a doctor who could certify his death without actually examining a live patient, or who could substitute a different body and authenticate it as Elvis. Doctor Nick's cooperation would have been essential to either of these scenarios. Investigators pointed to the fact that Dr. Nick had never provided a fully consistent and detailed account of exactly what he saw and did during the hours of Elvis's death. His statements over the years contained subtle variations and gaps that could be explained as normal imprecision in memory, but that could also reflect careful management of a story that needed to remain consistent without revealing too much. Dr. Nick had also continued to receive financial benefits connected to Elvis's estate after the singer's death, in ways that some investigators felt suggested ongoing loyalty was being rewarded. Priscilla Presley's knowledge was perhaps the most discussed question among investigators, who believed Elvis had faked his death. Priscilla had been closer to Elvis than almost anyone, and understood him in ways that went beyond what others could claim. If Elvis was going to continue any kind of life after his official death, even a completely hidden one, it seemed almost impossible that he would choose to do so without Priscilla knowing that he was alive. Investigators noted that Priscilla had consistently maintained a dignified and controlled demeanor when discussing Elvis over the decades since his death. She spoke about him with a kind of reverence and completeness that was different from how other people discussed those they had unexpectedly lost. When asked about Elvis in interviews, Priscilla's responses had a quality that some analysts described as carefully composed rather than spontaneously emotional, as if she was managing information rather than freely sharing memories. There was also the matter of the coded messages that Priscilla had described in various interviews over the years. Communications she said she had received after Elvis's death that contained phrases and references that only she and Elvis would have understood. Priscilla had been inconsistent about the details of these messages in different accounts, sometimes saying more and sometimes saying less, in ways that suggested she was carefully controlling how much she revealed, while still hinting at a truth she was not ready to fully disclose. Lisa Marie Presley, Elvis's daughter, had made statements throughout her life that people close to her described as suggesting she knew more about her father's fate than she publicly acknowledged. Lisa Marie had been only 9 years old when Elvis officially passed away, but she had been a perceptive and sensitive child who was deeply connected to her father. People who had known Lisa Marie well over the years said that she sometimes seemed to be protecting information about Elvis, rather than simply living with uncertainty about his death. What the scientists concluded, and where Elvis might be. After many months of careful study, long meetings, and review of new evidence from investigators and witnesses, the Morrison Foundation scientific team was ready to share their final report. Dr. Morrison knew their words would cause strong reactions. Many people would question their work. Because of this, she demanded that the report be exact and honest. Every statement had to be supported by clear evidence. She also wanted the language to be simple and truthful about what the evidence truly proved and what it only suggested. The report was titled DNA Analysis of Biological Samples Associated with Elvis Aaron Presley, Findings, Anomalies, and Recommendations. It was more than 200 pages long. It included detailed explanations of the methods used, technical data, statistical work, and discussions of other possible explanations. The executive summary was written in very simple language, so that ordinary people could understand it. The main conclusion of the report was direct. The DNA evidence studied by the team did not match the official story of the death of Elvis Presley on August 16, 1977. The scientists found a repeated pattern of genetic differences. Samples said to be from Elvis's body did not match DNA taken from his personal items or from verified family reference samples. These differences were large enough that they could not be explained by normal decay, contamination, or normal family variation. The report also discussed the fabric sample said to come from Graceland. Tests on this material showed biological markers that looked more like living tissue or tissue from someone who had passed away very recently. This did not match the official timeline. The scientists admitted that testing old and damaged samples always carries some doubt. Still, they believed the pattern was important and should not be ignored. The team officially called for a government investigation. They said there was strong public interest in knowing whether the official story of Elvis's death was correct. They asked that new DNA samples be collected from sources with clear and complete records. They also asked for a fresh review of the original autopsy and medical records by independent forensic experts. All documents related to the events of that day should be carefully studied again. The report clearly explained what the evidence did not prove. The scientists said their work could not prove that Elvis Presley was alive. It only showed serious questions about whether the body identified as Elvis was truly him. If there had been a mistake, that did not automatically mean he survived. There could have been other reasons, including possible fraud that did not involve Elvis himself. However, the investigators working with the scientists were more direct in their opinions. They looked at the DNA problems, the witness stories, the behavior of people close to Elvis, and the pattern of sighting reports. To them, all of this pointed toward one strong possibility, even if the scientists would not say it openly. When sighting reports were mapped, they showed an interesting pattern. Many reports came from Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and Arkansas. There were also smaller groups of reports in parts of Texas and New Mexico. This pattern suggested that if Elvis were alive, he might have stayed in the southern region where he grew up, while avoiding places where he would easily be recognized. Some of the most believable reports came from small towns in Mississippi and Tennessee. People described meeting an older man who looked like Elvis and knew a great deal about music and people from his past. In a few cases, this man attended small churches where gospel music was sung. Elvis had always loved gospel music deeply. One strong report came from a retired police officer in Mississippi. In the early 1990s, he met a man during a minor traffic issue. The man's documents were legal and showed a different name. Still, the officer felt certain he was looking at Elvis, older and heavier, but the same person. He did nothing at the time, but he never forgot the meeting. Investigators created a picture of how Elvis might live if he had survived. He would now be nearly 90 years old. He would need a new identity with strong documents. He would need medical care without raising questions. He would likely live quietly in a small community where people knew him by another name. In 1977, creating a new identity was easier than it is today. Computer systems were simple. With money and trusted helpers, it would have been possible. Dr. Morrison later spoke at a press conference. She stayed calm and careful. She repeated that the findings raised questions but did not give final proof. The scientific world reacted in different ways. Some experts agreed the DNA problems were real. Others worried about the age and history of the samples. In the end, whether Elvis Presley is alive remains unknown. The evidence raised serious doubts but gave no final answer. The mystery of what happened after August 16, 1977, remains one of the greatest unsolved stories in American popular culture.